Uh, this is kind of right in mission. It's part of our version of Ladino Day celebrations. Yesterday, people got to see the concert. Some days, years, we've only done some sort of concert or major program. But other years, we've had presenters, and this year we decided to go for this. Um, uh, I just want to point out the panelists. I'm not going to go through their bios. That is in the program that Rose just brought. But Brian Kirshen, who is an authority on Ladino. He teaches at Binghamton and he's on all sorts of other things. And he's one of the people that I have taken at least 3 classes with to help me learn Ladino better. Julia Peck, who is now going, she's up there on the screen someplace, wave. And she will tell us more about what she's doing, but she's also working on a PhD and has put together all sorts of teaching materials that when the time comes, I'll show you a little bit of what she's already done. Boaz Levy, who I have just met, and I don't know much about him, but you'll see it in the bio, and we may learn more. But you're the Jewish Museum
of Florida, yes.
Yeah. Jewish Museum of Florida. Victor Pesso, who is a member of the Sephardi Federation, a native Ladino speaker, the only one on our panel, and has a whole bunch of ideas about the need for integrating language learning with culture, etc. And who did I miss? Lily Henley, who was the singer we had here yesterday, who has a folk singing background, but has been doing a lot specifically with Ladino in the last several years. And if you were at the concert yesterday, you enjoyed both Ladino songs and a whole bunch of interesting classical folk songs. What she's done that's particularly interesting is put new music to some of these Ladino songs, which I really, really enjoyed, and I hope you did. The title of the program is How to Promote and Teach Ladino to a New Generation. I want to begin with an anecdote. My wife and I do lots of hiking. We're snowbirds. We're up in New York most of the 8 months of the year. And so we were hiking in Bear Mountain one day, which is right across the river from where we are on the Westchester side. And there are lots and lots of Hasidim in the area. And they do hiking too. And we were there, and there was a man with 3 of his children, one very young, and the youngest one started speaking to me in Yiddish because that's really the only thing that he knew. The other 2 were already fluent in English as well. And so he and I got into a discussion, and he was trying to explain why they try to maintain Yiddish. There's a midrash about the Exodus from Egypt, and it says part of the reason that the Jews were redeemed is because they kept some of their customs. In particular, they kept their language. At which point I explained to him, I do a Ladino class once a week. And I wasn't quite expecting it, but he was absolutely just as excited about people preserving Ladino as people preserving Yiddish. It's a reminder for me that things like the Jewish Language Project are very, very important, and preserving Ladino ought to be in the same vein. It's never going to be quite as the way Yiddish is, because we're not raising our children that way, but that doesn't mean we can all work on it. So today, we celebrate not just the past, but the living heart of Ladino. So with that, I'm going to start asking my first set of questions. Depending on where the panelists go, I may ask different questions, but I've got all sorts of probes to keep things interesting, I hope. The first question I got, and really go through each panelist individually, is how Ladino entered my life and why I teach it or learn it or use it in any way. And since Lily was our guest last yesterday, I'm going to let Lily start, if that's all right.
Okay. I feel like I'm like the least important person on this panel, but okay. Uh, how did Ladino enter my life? I grew up singing in Ladino as a kid, so I did have that. I don't really remember a time where I didn't know something about it, but I didn't start learning how to speak until I guess 2019 is what in 2018 I kickstarted an album that was not it was a totally separate album that I actually haven't even put out. It was an all English language album, and at a certain point I started posting videos. I just had to post all the time, so I was posting some videos um of some new Sephardic music that I was sort of working on the side just for fun. And somebody sent it to Francois Zal, who is the vice president of Aquí Estamos in Paris, which is the Ladino organization in Paris. And I received an invite to come to France to perform at the Jewish Culture Festival and to make an album of new Ladino music. And it was really exciting because it meant collaborating with really important language experts, or that was offered to me as an option. And I just like took it as much as I could. So I co-wrote songs with Marie Christine Barnes-Barol and um, worked with Susanna Weichschacher ahead of time just to like both really important language and music experts. And that's how I discovered that there was a collegiate level course in Ladino at the INALCO in Paris. And I applied for a Fulbright during the pandemic. Everything got canceled. And I had a huge break where I wasn't going to release the album when I thought I was going to release it. And I um, ended up applying for a Fulbright grant, which I received. And I spent a year in Paris learning Ladino sort of from the ground up in a much more official way than I had before. And that was the beginning. And then I found both that I loved learning the language itself, and that also I loved studying in a more official manner. And so I applied for to do a master's degree at Wesleyan in ethnomusicology. And most of my work is in music, but the language is so integral to the music that it's been like a deep language expedition in addition. And so I discovered like the international, I call it like the Latino revitalization community. And I'm embarrassed to say because two of the people in my main encontro, Gloria and Jane, are here, and I haven't come to our group in like a month and a half or something because I've been so overwhelmed. But it's just such a blessing. There's so many online resources, the ALL, and so many different ways to be speaking Ladino every week. And I feel so grateful to be all the way immersed in that world now and have that resource all the time as I pursue both new music creation and PhD. So that's my entrance and my current state.
Thank you so much. I just want to make one comment before I go into the next person, which you made a comment yesterday about how the role always reaches for a song for any vocabulary word. I was personally touched by that because while I got a lot of Ladino from my grandparents, when we're in our Ladino class every week, when I have trouble remembering a word, my father sang all of these songs, and I wind up reaching for that vocabulary and telling everybody what song it came from.
Yeah, I think it's a great resource. I still do it sometimes if I'm trying to think of like a conjugation that I am confused about and think about.
Okay, so with that, I want to go to Brian. Brian is very special to me. Judaism talks about special honor for one's teacher. Having taken 3 classes with Brian and listened to numerous presentations, he is still my personal authority on the world of Ladino and deserves that special honor as a teacher. Brian, same question, how Ladino entered my life and why I teach it or learn it, and maybe a little bit of how an Ashkenazi Jew got to be one of the world's experts in Ladino.
Thank you, Bob. That was very kind. And more common than one might think or expect in regard to Ashkenazi Jews showing this interest in Ladino, but that's certainly my case. Throughout school and graduate school, I'm originally from New York. I've had the chance to meet many of you in the audience, and also South Florida holds a special place in my heart in regard to my own activism and working with different groups. Being from New York, but doing graduate work at UCLA in Los Angeles, I was able to connect with the Sephardi community there, Ladino-speaking Sephardi community. And one of the hardest parts of graduate school is trying to find an area of scholarship that really interests you. And not just for the short term, not just to get a dissertation done, but to really just want to engage with the community and use your platform, so to speak, to help different people. Or languages. And so that was certainly my case. Being Jewish, being Ashkenazi, coming from a Yiddish-speaking family of sorts, it seemed like a natural bridge or connection to learn
We're
about
playing with the sound
world.
system, folks. Give me a chance to kind of get this fixed because, go ahead. All right. So now I have to figure out how to get it back. Yeah, where we should have been. And let's see if I can do that. So. Speaker, so
Can he speak?
yeah, no, I want to go back to headphones, so my microphone, I need to get the, yeah, let's get rid of that. I can't fix it. I don't have enough options.
I think he was coming through on the speaker now.
Have him say something now.
Say something, Brian.
Buenas tardes. Buenas
Okay.
tardes.
Not sure what happened. It fixed itself as we plugged in the right things. Sorry about that, guys.
Oh, okay. Well, in short, so again, being able to connect with the Sephardi community, at least in Los Angeles, and knowing that speaking in a language, learning a language, connecting with the community meant so much more. I've had a number of interviews where I've discussed, how a 30-minute interview of sorts turns into a several-hour meeting with buracas and boyas and bulamas and bizcochos and baklava, and it becomes really a relationship of sorts. And so I had the same experience when I was in Florida. I even with Miriam Bihar, who I know that this program is partially in honor of, keeping in touch with speakers, calling them on the phone, and creating relationships. I mean, it's really just been a special opportunity. So even though now that I teach the language through my own different platforms or my own nonprofit work, or including at my university, working with and collaborating with actual speakers and actual communities is paramount to any mission that we have to preserve and advance the language.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to move to Julia. I have never met Julia before, but Diane, who's a member of the Sephardi Federation, made connections through various Zooms that she attends, and said we ought to have her because she's putting together all this teaching material. So we said, sure. And I'm glad Julia was able to join us. And make sure you unmute yourself, Julia, so you can answer the same question.
Seguro. Mucho placer, Bob. Y merci por convidarme. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a huge pleasure to be here. I wish I were with you in Boca Raton, although it's pretty sunny here in Berkeley too. My story is in some ways similar to Brian's in that I'm yet another Ashkenazi who grew up going to my synagogue, my kal, and learning only about Ocho Candelicas, not knowing very much at all about Ladino. And later feeling quite robbed of the kind of richness in terms of Jewish multilingualism and Jewish cultures that I could have been learning from a young age. And instead, it took me until I got to a master's program at the University of Oxford, where I was already dedicated to the study of minority languages. I was working with different languages of Morocco and Turkey that had nothing to do with Ladino. And at the same time, a happy coincidence in my life is that I was becoming engaged to a Spanish person, and I eventually became a legal resident of Spain. I have the equivalent of a green card there. And so one day I looked at myself and I said, I'm a linguist working on minority languages. I'm going one day to have a Spanish Jewish children. What am I doing? Not dedicating myself and my studies and my effort to Ladino. And I wrote to Karen Gershon Sharon, who many of you probably know from Istanbul. And I had heard about something called the Ladino database corpus. I said, let me at least hear this language. Let me get kind of, let's see what it's about. And she said, well, you have to come to Istanbul and plug your computer into my hard drive to hear these interviews. They were interviews with about 80 native speakers from Istanbul and Izmir, about hour-long oral histories with each person. And so I went to Istanbul that summer. I plugged my computer into her hard drive and I started listening to these interviews. It became my master's thesis, but at first it was just a project of listening. And I was awestruck by these interviews. I couldn't stop listening to them. I think I've listened to every person's life story in that corpus so far. And one in particular really struck me. It was the one by Clara Peraya, who is the author, the co-author of one of the most wonderful Ladino dictionaries we have. It's the Ladino Turkish Dictionary. And she really impressed upon the listener in her interview that Ladino was, for her, she talked about the way that they took Turkish words and Hispanicized them. And she said, de esta manera hicimos palabras no solo españolas, ma palabras judías. And so what she was saying is that when we took Turkish words and Hispanicized them, this was a way of making the language our own and tracing really the history of the Sephardic people. So I fell in love. And here I am 8 or something years later doing my PhD in Ladino, and I've been honored to start to teach the language. I still feel humbled at the idea of being able to teach a language that I ultimately learned from mother tongue speakers who over time, like Brian, I developed relationships to. I have wonderful memories now of many hours in Istanbul sitting with mother tongue speakers, sometimes by the pool, sometimes in a cafe, and they gave so much time and patience talking to a young person like me. And now it's an honor to teach Ladino here at Berkeley. We have 18 students. I like to brag about that because at Harvard, the Ladino class had 4. And so we have a vibrant Ladino learning community here. We have a working group that meets every 2 weeks. And I'm teaching another course for adults soon. So it's changed my life and it's been the honor of my life. And the last thing I'll say is that I love going to Spain, where I spend about half of my year, and telling Spanish people about what I do. Many of them have never met a Jew before. Many of them have heard about Sephardim vaguely, and really making that real. And so it's an honor to be able to talk to my in-laws and my community members about the Jewish past and the Jewish future.
Thank you, Julia. And now we're going to get our very own Victor Peso, who is on the board of the Sephardi Federation and has been a significant contributor to everything we do. You're going to have to think about how to answer my question, because Ladino entered your life way back at the beginning. But tell us a little bit about that and what it's like growing up with it and coming here and speaking Ladino, and why you want to make sure that people learn it, and a little bit about your comments on culture.
Hi. As a native Ladino speaker, but we tend to not use the word Ladino. We use Espanol, Judeo-Espanol. For the very simple reason is in Ladino, there's the teaching and the learning of the language. And I see many communities just want to learn to speak. However, there's another part to the Ladino language, which is the culture. Culture is just as important, if not more so, because that's what makes the Jewish part of Ladino. Ladino is only a language. And I remember my grandfather speaking Ladino, and he always had Hebrew characters. They read Hebrew, and they spoke Jewish. However, today, a few things changed. They don't read in Hebrew, they read in land characters. And And they see the differential between one group of people and the other. I have a few relatives in Israel. They are learning to speak the language of their grandfathers and grandmothers in Hebrew. They're using the Hebrew language in lieu of using the letters of the land characters. So we to understand, even if you want to write and read in land characters, is absolutely okay with that. There's nothing wrong with it. However, they're losing the culture of the Jewish people, the Sephardi and the culture Jewish portion. There's a big changeover in Israel where they're learning in Hebrew the same way as they're learning Ladino using the land character. And that's what I'm provoking, and that's what I'm endorsing. Uh, let's not forget the culture of the Jewish people, the Sephardim, what happened in the last 100 years. Uh, we had Thessaloniki, over 50,000 Jewish people disappeared. They went to the ovens, never to come back. And they were all Ladino, Spanish characters. They used it. But some of them spoke the true Ladino with the culture. Let's learn the culture as well as we learn the language, the written language, and the spoken language. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. I want to add just a little bit more to that, but I learned to write in those Silatreo characters from my grandfather. I saw them writing the letters back and forth to people in Turkey, and I said, teach me. And he sat me down and started teaching me how to do that. And my grandmother would describe those Latin characters as Christian letters.
Yeah.
All right. And the Hebrew, the Solitreo or Rashi characters as Jewish letters. And as far as she was concerned, there was something that bordered on Christianity to even use Latin characters. So I have an appreciation for that. I would add that the synagogue part of the culture is important. In the Sephardic world, um, nobody ever seemed as strict as what I see in the Ashkenazi world, but the synagogue was a very, very important part of our life. And I've added to the culture by having studied not just the Ladino, but I've studied Sephardic Jewish liturgy with a master cantor who teaches that, who happened to have been the rabbi of our Sephardic synagogue, and he was delighted to have somebody interested. He's now in Israel, and I still stay in touch with him. With that, I want to move to our newest person involved with the Sephardi Federation. I barely know him other than his connection with the museum, but that sounds like a good place to have somebody else here. Boaz Levy, and you're on.
Merci mucho, estoy muy agradecido por estar aquí. I'm Boaz Israel Levy. As Bob mentioned, we met each other over email because the incredible Rose, who does so much organizing down here, I mentioned that I wanted to get more connected with Ladino Hablantes down here, and she connected me with Bob, and she suggested that I join the panel, and Bob was very kind as to welcome me. As Bob mentioned, I'm kind of the newest member, not just to the community here, but in general. So I'm Gen Z, I'm a Zoomer. And like many Gen Z, I learned Ladino during the kind of explosion that happened during the pandemic. I was in undergraduate school and I applied to learn through the Oxford studies program. I learned under Carlos Lopez, who was a great teacher. And because we learned through Oxford, which was a more scholarly setting, I actually learned with Rashi, the Hebrew characters that are very important, and have since also tried to learn more and more with Solitreo, and very grateful to the work that people like Brian have done to ensure that Solitreo is still a part of Ladino. And I was interested in it for scholarly purposes. Outside of my work at the museum, I do research on Jewish people in what we call the Mashrek, the Eastern Mediterranean, and seeing how Ladino is articulated politically, not just in these very important cultural and uh, uh, um, uh, religious ways, but also its role in politics. Um, and so I started learning the classes for that reason, but also because of a personal connection. So we know like Yiddish is called the Mamaloshin, and a Ladino scholar, Devin Naar, has called Yiddish kind of like a Lashon de Nono, so the grandfather tongue. Because for people like me, our only connection are through our grandparents. My grandfather is lives in Israel, and he speaks Ladino, but we never heard it actually. It wasn't until I started learning it that he began to speak to me in Ladino. Collectively, my great grandparents spoke so many languages: Kurdish, Arabic, Ladino, Turkish. But because in their case, unlike maybe the my Ladino Hablantes in Greece, there wasn't a loss because of the Holocaust and genocide, but because of social and cultural pressure in Israeli society to assimilate and to only speak Hebrew. And so a lot of my interest in learning Ladino is to revive in my family's tradition and for other families who come from that Israeli context, an openness to speaking in other Jewish languages, other languages in general. And so it's kind of two parts. There's that family heritage prong, and then there's the part that's interested in the research, but both are very important to me.
Thank you, Boaz. That's going to begin to take us to the next general topic. Here we begin to talk about how to teach and perpetuate all of this. I just want to add one other comment. You talked about Yiddish as Mama Loshen, the mother tongue. All right. Loshen sounds very strange, but it's the same as Lashon. And Mama, we all understand. But interestingly, the description that I would have gotten from my parents was Me'am Loez, all right, which is the title of a major compendium of commentary written in Ladino. And I happen to be descended from those authors, or the second one that took over after Isaac Cooley died. But that was always important. It's the reminder that that's important, but we can't forget the Hebrew part of our culture as well. And my father was very careful to make sure that I learned to speak Hebrew exactly the way he and his grandfather did, to such an extent that I remember davening at a Sephardic synagogue where there was a linguist that was an expert and could recognize that I was speaking Hebrew with an accent from Teki to Dak. With that, I'm going to move us. Let me just add a little bit about culture. So we have had two people talking about the culture, and while the language is critical to understanding the culture is critical to understanding the language, and some of the idioms and the refranes in Ladino are incomprehensible if you don't begin to understand the culture. And so that's a connection, and that's something that truly helps us to understand the people that we came from. Let's move into some discussions more about teaching generally. And I'm going to combine the next two because time is moving on faster than I ever expected. So in any way you want to talk about this, and I'm losing track of who we were up to because I missed my checklist, so you're going to tell me. But the next questions is, how do we both teach both the language and the culture? What has worked best with younger learners? What has worked better with adult learners? And what can synagogues, cultural centers, and families do to keep Ladino audible? It absolutely needs to be a spoken language if we're really going to preserve it. How does music help? How does storytelling help? I try and bring stories into everything I teach. And every time we get to a holiday, we kind of switch in the Ladino class the things that come from that holiday, because there's a whole bunch of special stuff. And I'd like to hear from you guys about teaching and culture and how we can make institutions help us out. Any thoughts, Lily?
Why don't we start with the people that are literally teaching the language, and then I'll add.
Okay, so let's start with, actually, rather than Brian, I'd like to hear from Julia, mostly because I know very little about what she's doing. And so why don't we start with Julia?
Sure. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I teach Ladino here at Berkeley. And one thing I love about the class, and I know that not everybody gets to control their curriculum this way potentially, but it is not just a language class, but it's designed to be a language and culture course at once. So it's 4 credits. So if that means anything to anyone, it's just more than your normal language class. And so what I do is on the Tuesdays of the class, we're focusing on a new linguistic topic and we're getting lots of practice in. And I try to keep it as relevant to the students' day to day as possible. So I'm giving them, and this is one answer to the question of what to do with older learners or adult learners. These are people in their early 20s. I'm constantly giving them structured conversation prompts so that they're able to speak in the language right away. I think if we start out with, I think lots of people have maybe been burned in high school from their French class or their Spanish class of memorization style tactics. One thing I've heard from students is they, especially because it's a minoritized, endangered language with not many speakers, they want to feel that the language is alive and they want to feel right away that they can use the language. But that doesn't mean we're not integrating culture and we're not integrating the past. So the second day of the week on Thursdays, we're doing a culture and reading seminar. And so this week, the students are actually reading the text of the Edict of Expulsion, the Alhambra Decree, and then we'll go up through the centuries until we end at the 21st century at the end of the semester. And we're doing discussions mostly in English for now on Thursdays about where Ladino comes from. And so they have a really kind of grounded understanding of the language. But then for their homework, one thing that I like to do is if they've learned a new linguistic structure in class, I'll give them homework where they're engaging with authentic texts and they're engaging with productions of speakers in Ladino. And so last week I had them listening to that Ladino database corpus from Istanbul that you all heard me talk about. I had them finding the nouns and adjective pairs. I had them listening to people responding to what they were hearing in those interviews. And then next week, they're going to be, because they're learning Rashi, they're learning to read in Hebrew, they're going to be transliterating the first sentence of Saadi Besalel Alevi's Ladino memoir from Salonika, the first memoir that we have written in Ladino in the late 1800s. And so right away, they're seeing kind of Ladino being able to be used in their daily lives, and they're seeing kind of the long thread of history that connects them to the speakers of the past and the long legacy of the language. And the last thing I'll say, to keep this brief, because this is such a rich question, is just to mention a little bit the project I have related to at-home language nesting. And this is a place where I think it's really important in terms of connecting the language and culture. I also have a box too, Bob. I love that you're doing promo work. It's a project to bring the language out of the classroom and into the home space. Getting my PhD in language revitalization, one thing that we know is that the kind of key to keeping a language that's endangered alive is to make sure it's used in many domains of life, especially in the home space, and especially if we are people who have kids at home. And so one way to do this is just this project is one way to engage in this. And anyone can access it online. And also you can request a box from me, is essentially to start doing the daily activities you do at home in Ladino. And so this is a kit that helps you do that. And it's not just washing your hands and washing the dishes. There's also ways with, if you check the website, to integrate Sephardic recipes and narrate your cooking in Ladino. There is a domain to help you set up the Shabbat table in Ladino. And so there you're able to kind of live the Sephardic cultural traditions of your family or the ones that you've adopted in the language as well. And so that's another tool that you all can use either as teachers or as students. And if you're interested, I'd love to share those. But I'm excited to hear what other people do in terms of integrating culture into their teaching.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julia. I'm going to go to Brian next, but I just want to make a comment. of our Ladino class took a 6-month break from doing it the way we always have and booked Liliana Benvenisti to teach us. So that was it. Our weekly sessions were with her. Most of the people that start with her tend to have a Spanish background, which makes it easier in some way. We didn't, so we struggled, so we spent 6 months doing 5 months of her classes, and we're going to finish up when the snowbird season is over next April with 1 more month. But she spent an extraordinary amount of time with culture and Jewish life cycles, Sephardic life cycles, and all of that. And we got mixed reactions from our class because some people found it too much, but many of us really, really enjoyed that. I like getting it in Ladino because I have the Sephardic synagogue background. I didn't need the learning per se, but knowing how to do it in Ladino was delightful for me. So that culture is, just very, very important. Before I go on to Brian, just one other comment. I really like Julia's nesting program because, before I took the family on our first trip to Israel, that's exactly what we did with Hebrew to get my kids comfortable with Hebrew as a language rather than just a language for prayer. Brian, whose teaching I love and whose style I love. So for me, that was perfect, but we need to understand how to bring this to a whole bunch of other people with different sorts of personalities. You're on, Brian.
Thanks. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of audiences, from children, young children at the Sephardic Adventure Camp in Washington, to older speakers through the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles, hundreds of people online, university students. So there's definitely a range of ways to connect with students. However, we may perceive them to be. The thing is, for students of Ladino, they're not typical students outside of a university setting. So that's something to keep in mind, but that also gives us a lot of opportunity. I think that, to tie in both your questions, Bob, the synagogue El Kal really is a hub for Ladino. And so I get a little bit strict with everybody I work with in this regard, that, when I teach Ladino, I'm not here to teach you Spanish. You're not here to learn just simply Spanish. We're not here to etymologically parse, oh, this word comes from Turkish and that word comes from Turkish, because then we're just kind of analyzing language as if, there are no speakers anymore. And so this is a living language. And I try to incorporate culture and religion is or at least religion through culture, it's very easy, but it's important to do. Through Johar stories, it's a simple integration, and you could adapt it to any age group, including for kids. Of course, the kids that I work with at the Sephardic Adventure Camp every few years, they want to play games and learn Ladino in fun, entertaining ways through competition and reward. But integrating it through, like Victor was saying before, some of the rich materials that have been published and printed for centuries in Rashi, Merubah, or Solotreo characters is a rich way to expose people to periodicals from throughout the Ottoman world and even in the US. Baño de novia, different bridal customs, or something like you mentioned in regard to life cycle events, is another important way. At the synagogue, of course, you could include vender mitzvot to teach numbers, or selling of the honors, or auctions. There's so many different ways that can be, language can be integrated into the classroom through culture. Of course, even a day like today with Las Fruticas, or Tu Bishvat, Alegre, having all the different seders, not just during Passover, but for Yeirazones and Fruticas. These are such elements that you could incorporate to learn either food items, which is a staple for Sephardic culture, music, which is one of the domains in which everybody likes to connect. And so there are various avenues, but again, it really does take educators working with students and community members to know what is available, and not just teaching the language through the lens of this is an endangered or dying language, but also there are still incredible resources. And something I do with my students, depending on the opportunity, is connect them to Sephardic Studies in Action or language apprenticeships, getting them to know who speakers are.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go to Victor, who brings a unique perspective, because he's neither ever been a teacher nor a student per se, but is heavily committed to the mission of the Sephardi Federation, which is propagating Sephardic culture and the Ladino language. And anything that you want to add about ways to continue to foster all of this through whatever venues you think, be it synagogues, institutions, groups like us, or whatever. You're on your own, Victor.
Thank you. Um, I'm not an educator. I'm an engineer. So I want to push that aside. Though I know most of you guys are educators, and you're doing a good job. I'm sure you will. However, my part is, again, I'm going to go back to culture and I'm going to go back to history. We just cannot abandon our culture. We cannot abandon our history. We cannot abandon our foods. We cannot abandon talking with our hands. That was our traditions. Uh, since you went with the Yiddish speaking people, they had their tradition. They had Yiddish, and they spoke it, and they had Yiddish songs, and they had Yiddish uh, theater. We also had the Sephardi. We also had exactly the same thing. Only thing is, we are losing it much too fast. And what am I here for? I'm here to, I don't want to use the word teacher because I'm not a teacher. So I want to say something that's very important. We must use all our tools that we have to keep our Sephardi traditions going, including foods, including songs. Let me say something about songs. As a child, I was brought up with many, child's 5, 6, 7 years old. We were brought up with the mothers and the sisters, the husbands, the fathers, and the uncles. They went to work, and a typical Sephardic family. The women they went inside to do the baking, and when they finished baking, they came outside and they always had a courtyard and they sat around and they sang and they sang and they told stories. I remember some of those stories. I don't remember all, but we must remember that it's not only what's happening today. We get to move today over. We must know what happened 100 years ago. We cannot forget about the Holocaust. We cannot forget about what happened in Salonika, what happened in Florida, what happened in Monastir. We cannot forget that we must go back and look at it and not abandon it. That's that's what I say.
Thank you, Victor. Do you want to add anything, Lily, or should I go on to the next topic?
No, I'm happy to. It's just really nice to hear the kind of, I don't know what you call it, but that on like hands-on educators that are in classes on a regular basis, teaching and making making a syllabus, especially one that includes both language learning and cultural learning. It's really complicated. I think like much more difficult and multifaceted than like you'd think if you're just a student. But I'd say I've been a student in Ladino classes, and I've also done quite a bit of ethnography on how Ladino is being taught, specifically in my case, how music is being used in classrooms. And actually, for that, interviewed Brian. I also interviewed Gloria, who's on the Zoom here, because I know that she ran a Ladino class at Tufts University, like one of the earliest Ladino classes in that area. But I have not experienced a Ladino course that was not like a language and culture course. I feel like it's almost always together, and a huge part of that, as some of that, as most people have mentioned, is just that Ladino, because it's a endangered language, And this is really a big difference. There's a really big difference between a minority language and an endangered language. A minority language is a language that is not spoken by a lot of people. But an endangered language, I think one of the big separations is, especially in the case of Ladino, there's nowhere you can go where people only speak Ladino. Even in like cases like languages like Irish Gaelic, for instance, you can go to places in Ireland where everybody's only speaking Gaelic and you can be immersed. So it's a huge pressure on the educator to provide the cultural context that would be provided by, an immersive trip to an area where everybody is just, and I think like a big part of that, as Ryan and Julia have both pointed out, is the music and kind of like the history, but history taught not as a here's what happened in the far distant ancient past, which is a big problem that we have in Sephardic situations. There's so much like mythologizing and kind of imagining Ladino and Sephardic history as this like ancient Spanish heritage or something. A huge part of that is as educating about history, but it's like much more recent than people like imagine. And it somebody like Victor is great. Yesterday we sat and we spoke Spanish and we talked about his childhood in East New York, where he grew up, and he told me about the 3 synagogues in East New York that were started by the different communities, all Ladino speaking, and what it was like, and you just get pieces of the culture when that happens. And so in my experiences in the classroom, often being taught by non-Sephardic people, like both Ashkenazi people that are fluent and also Marie Christine Bourns-Varol and 2 of my close like Ladino colleagues in France, Jelko Jovanovic and Pandelis Mambrogianis, who are, Pandelis Mambrogianis is an amazing speaker of Ladino. He's from Thessaloniki and he's not Jewish. Marie Christine Bourns-Varol is not Jewish. Her husband is a native Ladino speaker from Istanbul. But this is just huge culture, and even the basics of learning, like the vocabulary, is connected to the culture and to music and to food. And I guess the one other thing I'd mention is that the students that you're teaching really change the context of the pressure. Because my first class was in a French context. French speaking people already know the grammar of Ladino in most parts. So you're not in the position that Brian and Julia are in a lot, where you're both trying to teach a Latin grammatical system while making sure that it's separate from learning Spanish, and that the student is getting a real chunk of Sephardic culture and Ladino vocabulary. In the case of a class taught to mostly French speaking students, you really are just diving directly into what makes Ladino versus having to bridge all of that. So I don't know, there's a lot of complications, but it's incredibly exciting, everything that's happening. I think I honestly feel at almost every concert I mention the American Ladino League Encuentro. And the reason that I do this is because people can join that one without having come to the class before. They can just come, they don't have to know any of the language, and they're going to meet, maybe they've never met somebody that speaks Ladino fluently or is a native speaker of Ladino. They're going to meet somebody on that Zoom that does, and that's going to tell them it's alive. There are people to ask questions. Nobody can say that, oh, nobody really knows how this would work. And it's the first step towards, oh, maybe I get more serious. Maybe I take the harder course Bob's talking about from Liliana or something like that. Or take one of Ryan's courses that's the whole semester. But it's like a little tiptoeing in to something bigger.
Thank you, Lily. Very quickly, I'm gonna let Boaz see if he wants to add anything, and then I'm gonna go to some concluding kinds of comments for all of us.
I want to say one thing, so not joking, just very short. I'm sorry. I want to add something that's very important. When we talk about Ladino, we must emphasize that we're talking about a Jewish language. It's not
Yes.
just anything. It's not Ladino. It's just like Yiddish. It's Jewish language. We are Jewish and we speak the Jewish language. It happens to be or land because that's not our origin. But we can't hold that away. We have to keep it. We have to keep it. That's all I have to say.
We'll do questions in just a moment.
Wanted to ask,
Speak up or
when I was in Saloniki, I went some lecture there. Yo hablo ladino de como tú.
Con mí. Tú hablas mismo español con nosotros.
De cuando nací, yo no sabía hebreo, no sabía nada.
¿De qué país tú vienes?
Solo ladino. ¿Ah?
¿De qué país tú vienes?
Yo vengo de Lakewood, Florida. No, yo no soy. Yo vengo de Israel. Anyway, when I was in Saloniki,
Yeah.
I went there to investigate my family. I was there for 3 months.
Yeah.
And I found out very, very, very sad that the people from Saloniki, they don't even know about the Jews. They don't even know nothing about the Jews.
Estás hablando de verdad.
Estoy hablando verdad, verdad, la verdad. Como la verdad de Dios, estoy hablando ahora.
Okay.
No,
So we
no
need to move
saben.
on. That's fascinating. And that sounds like a really good topic for another panel discussion. Yeah.
Gracias.
Wait, would you grab that mic and bring it back?
Me llamo Carlos.
So let me just go back.
Me llamo Tony.
Yeah. I just want to point out that the program has a list of resources that you can check out, including some that we have posted on a dedicated Dropbox drive, which you can get to with that QR code. But we have several textbooks there. We have the Ala Markova Beginner's Ladino. And I know that lots of people seem to question that because it does have mistakes, etc. But I can tell you that our class has actually found that probably the easiest text to work with. We also have Gloria Asher's translations of the Cohen Serrano books. We also have a children's book that looks a lot like Julia Peck stuff called Mi Mundo en Ladino. And we have a collection of dictionaries, the Hippocrene Concise Dictionary, Ladino Frances Nehama, Diccionario Básico Ladino, Ladino Comunidad Dictionary, and then all sorts of guides with pictures of everything you can imagine in Ladino words. And because I'm really into music, you've got a collection of 8 different downloadable Ladino songbooks that you can play piano or guitar or my instruments, oud and kanun. And we reference classes by Julia Peck, Brian Kirshen, and the Sephardi Federation's Viva Ladino. If you wanted to join that, you get to work with me and Diane every week. We're not teachers per se because we're only a little bit more knowledgeable than some of the students. So I call us facilitators, but it's a fun Ladino program every week. And then I've got a whole bunch of other resources, how to get to Julia Peck's website, the American Sephardi Federation, the Sephardic Brotherhood for classes, their digital academy. If anybody wants to try the program we did with Liliana Benvenisti, I've got that link. One of my favorites in terms of songs is Gerard Ebery, the Ladino Song Project, which has something like 700 Ladino songs and music posted. I've heard him in concert. I don't know why he lives in Poland now, but I heard him originally in the Bronx way back when. And that's when I got to meet him. And of course, the American Ladino League, and there's probably more that I haven't gotten. So I want to kind of just make my last question to each person quickly. What is one thing every community can do to promote Ladino? Why don't we start? You want to take a stab at it, Lily?
Boaz was skipped in the last.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So why don't you take a stab at it?
I was actually going to suggest, since Julia has to hop off soon, do we want to let her start?
Sure, let's have her start. Sure.
Sounds That's very kind. Thank you. I have office hours for my Ladino students, and they had to transcribe some refranes in Rashi, and they're probably needing my help. So thank you. One thing that I think every community can do, this sounds really simplistic, but use the language. I strongly believe that every minute any of us are using Ladino, whether it's the smallest, a sentence frame where you stick in a word like Mad Libs, you're still using the language. If you're carrying on a whole conversation, you're still using the language. I think one thing we need to do is kind of create a culture of not being afraid to use it, not being afraid to make mistakes, of creating space and time to use the language. I think often it's very easy to talk about it a lot, and that's totally natural and wonderful. And creating spaces to use the language, whether or not we're experts or just starting out, is the most important thing a community can do, and celebrating each other when we do. So creating kind of the positivity and the vibrance that maybe we feel jealous of in the Yiddish world, we're doing it. We have wonderful spaces to speak the language. And any community, especially if you have access to in-person spaces, that's something we really need. Give those spaces a little bit of time in the beginning or end of events, or even entire events, to use the language. And so that's what I would say. And I'm so sorry I have to leave you all. I will say hello from my students. I'll tell them about this wonderful event. I'll connect them with the resources that all of you are working on and putting out. I'll probably play them some of Lily's music at our Frutica Seder tomorrow. And again, thank you so much for inviting me.
Albernos.
Alvermos, sí.
Vemos.
Can you say something to people?
Wait, oh, before she leaves, he just ended, so I can't do that. Sorry,
My granddaughter's teacher.
could be,
She is my granddaughter's
All right.
teacher. To tell.
okay.
Tell us.
I will give you some connections so that you can find a way to send her a note.
Beautiful.
Bob,
Uh,
Bob, can you say something about your karaoke? That is
We're
a
gonna do that
wonderful
this
thing.
afternoon. So before I go on to the next people, let me give you a few things that I would suggest. I have discovered that every Ashkenazi synagogue with which I have been associated is delighted to let me do Ladino and Sephardic stuff. So because I do liturgy as well, I've done liturgy at our synagogue up north. I've done it for several synagogues. I've done programs at various places. I tend to do a lot more with the traditional Hebrew medieval Sephardic poetry, but I'm happy to do Ladino stuff. I sing Ladino songs at our synagogue. They're willing to do a lot. And I just remember that for the Brit Milah for my grandson, it was at their synagogue, an Ashkenazi conservative synagogue. And my son was very cautious about beginning with Quando el Rey Nimrod, which if you're not aware of it, people don't always sing the last two verses, but it's about Abraham, which is important for Brit Milah. But the last two verses talk about welcoming the Moel up to take care of the Brits, the Brit Milah. And my son was very cautious about it. His wife, who was Ashkenazi, had no problem with it. And we talked to their cantor, and their cantor was so delighted that we wanted to do that. And so we sang that song. I handed out song sheets for everybody that was there. And, so we can do these kinds of things. You just have to ask. And I have yet to find the leaders of any Ashkenazi synagogue that hesitated in any way to say, let's do stuff. So that kind of brings me near the end. Did we get, so is any, yes, anybody else that wants to just add anything to one thing that you would recommend that people do? Victor, anything you want to go for?
With somebody else.
Okay. Boaz, go. You're on. One thing.
Do you still have the mic there?
Yep.
So I really encourage people to use Ladino with people who have other connections to the language, even if it's not Ladino. So I live in Miami and I speak it all the time with my Cuban friends. And they just treat it like they would treat another dialect of Spanish. I'm talking it a bit with my Turkish friends. Sometimes they look at me funny when I'm trying to order coffee at a ventanita, and but they usually understand, and I think that makes it very good for me to practice, and it exposes more people to the language. It encourages more people to see it as like we're talking about a living language instead of something of the past or something that's endangered or dying. And so I'm very grateful to have it in Miami, where there are a lot of Turkish and Ladino Spanish speakers who I can make them go with me. Yesterday I had fruticas and I invited all my, Ashkenazi friends and we did it in Ladino and people are very open to it. And so I encourage people to find those connections.
And I might add for you with your museum connection, maybe you can run a few Ladino kinds of events at the museum.
Oh, yes.
Brian,
Just show up and continue to support our events, our Ladino days, the classes. That's the most important thing you could do.
okay, I'm going to finish up with a few brief closing words. En su y el corazón tiene memoria. We remember with joy. Quien no sabe de dónde viene, no sabe dónde va. He who does not know where he comes from does not know where he is going. And so we want to preserve all of this. With that, we're kind of running a little bit late, but if we have any questions, this is your option, and Jake will bring you the microphone.
Hi, my name is Kenny. Has anyone thought of making an app for the iPhone? Like I'm on Duolingo every day.
I have written to Duolingo because they say they do endangered languages and they advertise the ones they do. And I got zero response, but I'm willing to keep trying. There are some things, there's a program, Brian may be able to help me, but where you can speak to Estrella. And I didn't put that on the list because I had trouble making that work. It didn't work well for me. But anything else that you know about, Brian, that you want to tell us?
If the question is in regard to Google, it depends. There's a number of applications right now you might be able to use. But yeah, in regard to Google Translate, there's opportunity for sure. But it just depends, like you said, with Duolingo. Would take a lot of time, efforts, and cooperation or collaboration with major companies to do that. I know a lot of times some of the programs have stopped. Duolingo is not doing any more additions for endangered languages. Rosetta Stone stopped that a while ago as well. So there are some resources out there, though.
Okay, I will add one other comment. I use artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, for a lot of things. And when I'm writing something in Ladino, and I've gotten some stuff that Aki Yerushalayim has agreed to publish, and I'm ready to submit more. But before I wait for Aldo Sebi to give me his corrections, I actually ask people like Jake and Diane, but then I give it to ChatGPT, who's increasingly learning more and more Ladino, possibly because I use it that way. And it comes back and it looks at my vocabulary, and it says, these are words that are common in Ladino. These came from Turkish or Greek, whatever. It gives me the etymology. When I'm preparing something for the class, I ask it to give me a vocabulary list of anything that's not common in Spanish, and it does that. So there are ways to increasingly to use artificial intelligence to help you out.
Can I say something? Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. The Esreika program was set up by Carlos Gebra Lopez and Alex Cicero. And I tried it. When I tried it, it was only written. There was no verbal conversation. Is that correct?
I can't answer that.
Okay, that's the experience that I had. It was half of it. I had to be half of it. I could write and I could listen to her, or I don't remember the other way around. But therefore, I didn't find it very valuable.
It wasn't a two-way conversation.
Yeah, it was not a two-way conversation. I would love a two-way conversation. I'm not capable of doing that. I hope somebody is. I'm techie, but I'm not that techie. Before I close out, actually, we have two special people that join us for a lot of events that are on our Zoom. And I'm going to ask first Gloria and then Jane if you want to add anything before we close and go to refreshments, which I'm sorry we can't offer you. Gloria, anything you want to say?
Well, muchas gracias. Antes de todo, thank you so much for doing this and for including us. I had all kinds of things, and I controlled myself and did not write all the notes that I won't be able to read after anyway. But I'm impressed by this event, and this event goes against something that maybe I'm just too sensitive, but I won't accept this moribund dying and all that stuff. And then that crept in somehow. That crept in to our discussion. And para mí, la lengua es lingua viva. And the proof is what we're doing. The proof is the wonderful panel over here. So that's one reaction I had. Another reaction is I'm impressed and I'm overjoyed about the variety of opinions and things that people are doing and personalities also. Just the panel, such different people, and we're all united. Well, I say we, I'm not part of the panel, but I think we who came also are part of this thing. So it's a wonderful event, and thank you so much for having us be part of that. I wish every time I see these things, I say, come on, Florida's not so far away. It's just a plane ride. Maybe you could, it makes you want to come and see you all in person. But muchas
We need to move
gracias.
on. Gloria,
Wonderful.
thank you so
And
much.
Fruticas Alegre, I thought that you would make some, I mean, I could make my own connection, just as it looks so dismal with the snow and nothing in the trees. All of a sudden, it's Fruticas, it's Tu Shabbat, and there is life there, and you see the beautiful little pink blossoms coming out. So I think that's the same with our language. And it's nice that you had it exactly on this day. It's a good omen. I believe in things like that. I like connections.
Okay, Jane, if you have anything to say, and before
Well,
Jane says anything, I will make a comment. Jane, having written several things for Aki Yerushalayim, was my inspiration to try and submit some articles.
I'm sorry. What did you say about
You were
Akija?
my inspiration to try and submit some articles.
Oh, good. Oh,
Having seen what you wrote for them and loving it.
thank you. I'm delighted to hear that, Bob, and thank you for giving us a special, Gloria and me, and giving us a special invitation to your panel. This has been wonderful and typical. It's typical of you, Bob, to have such a wonderful panel and address so many things. One of the things you've done with Viva Ladino, which was special for Gloria and for me, was you read our Ladino works with the group and you went over them, you made vocabulary lists. That was beautiful to have my short stories in Ladino read by your group and talked about and responded to. That was a beautiful thing, and it's a kind of learning that I think is very dynamic and exciting to do with anyone. So I would just add that you have provided that to Viva Ladino. And also, you didn't mention your karaoke.
Well, the
So,
karaoke everybody here knows about because we're doing that this afternoon. But
okay, good.
created these karaoke's. I use an artificial intelligence program provided by Cara Fun, one of the major karaoke people, and I can put an MP3 into it, and with that, it generates a karaoke. The more clarity that the singer has in voice, the easier it is. The karaoke doesn't understand Ladino per se; it thinks it's Spanish. So I then have to go through a process of correcting spelling.
Of course. Yeah.
All right, correcting spelling and making sure that it lines up properly with the music.
Right.
So it's a process. It's not as simple as if I was doing English. I have inquired from them you know, because I'm interested in doing Hebrew stuff, etc. It doesn't know at all know how to do things that aren't in Latin, and
Letters.
yeah,
Okay.
Latin-based alphabets. But they were intrigued with maybe getting to Hebrew. The chances of actually Ladino ever happening is probably close to zero. But I enjoy it. I like to bring the music to everybody, and I've actually had several schools when they first heard about it, wanting to use some of it with their students.
Just want to go back to thank you. I'm glad you discussed that a little bit. But going back to when I write a short story in Ladino, the beauty is if I connect to readers, that if readers actually read my short stories in Ladino, that is thrilling. And
Okay, so I just want to add, Jake just reminded me to let everyone know that your nom de plume synonym for is Shalach Manot, and so that you can look her up and you can buy that book on Amazon.
thank you. Okay. Beautiful. Thanks so much for inviting
So,
me.
thanks to everybody on the panel. I hope you thought it useful, interesting, and I hope the audience did. And I will be putting this recording together. Maybe we've been taking a video of it from the other side. Between one of them will go up on YouTube over the course of the next week or so when I have time to convert it.
Great. Well, you're terrific, Bob. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Bob.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
All right, this is the end. I'm pressing end, guys.
Thanks again.